Steel screams. The sound arrives first, not through water, but through the U-boat's hull itself. A metallic shriek that vibrates through every rivet, every weld, every man's teeth. Then the shock wave. The Type 7C lurches sideways like a kicked can. Light bulbs explode, glass gauges spiderweb. Someone's nose starts bleeding from pressure differentials alone. 140 meters down. The Atlantic, May 1943. 200 Meter, the diving officer shouts, but the depth gauge needle is already spinning past operational limits. The crew knows what happens at crush depth. The 18.5 millimeter pressure hull, designed for 100 meters, tested to maybe 200, becomes a tomb at 280. Another detonation, closer. The chief engineer grips a valve wheel so hard his knuckles crack. He's counting, not explosions, but seconds between them. Pattern bombing, 6 charges per run. If they're British, they're dropping 600-pound Mark 7 depth charges. If they're lucky, TNT. If they're unlucky, the third explosion hits directly overhead. Water doesn't compress. That's the killer. When 270 kilograms of Torpex detonates 15 meters above a submerged hull, it doesn't push water aside, it weaponizes it, creates a shock wave traveling at 1,500 meters per second, followed by a gas bubble that expands, contracts, expands again, a hydraulic hammer beating the submarine like a sheet of aluminum foil. Something gives. A pipe coupling. High-pressure seawater jets across the engine room in a stream thin enough to cut flesh. All compartments report, the commander barks. But this isn't about reports anymore. This is about mathematics, about pressure tolerances and structural limits, about whether German shipyard engineers in Danzig truly understood the physics they were calculating. The depth gauge hits 180 meters, still falling. And somewhere above, another barrel is rolling off a British destroyer's stern rack. Rewind 18 months. London, November 1941. Admiralty charts spread across polished oak. Red pins mark merchant ship losses, one for every 10,000 tons sent to the bottom. By October, Britain was hemorrhaging 156,000 tons monthly. At current rates, the island would starve before summer 1943. The problem wasn't identifying U-boats. Aztec sonar could paint acoustic pictures of submarines 3,000 yards out. The problem was killing them once detected. Commander R.H. Rankin stood before assembled naval engineers holding a single cylindrical device. "Gentlemen, we are dropping 300 explosives per U-boat sunk. 300. At this rate, we'll run out of TNT before we run out of Germans." The weapon in his hand, a Mark 7 depth charge, represented cutting-edge anti-submarine technology. 600 pounds of high explosive in a streamlined canister. A hydrostatic pistol set to detonate at predetermined depth. Simple, reliable, inadequate. Type 7 U-boats were engineering masterpieces, single-hulled pressure vessels with operational depths of 100 meters and crush depths approaching 280. Their 18.5 millimeter steel hulls could withstand ambient pressure exceeding 28 atmospheres. Depth charges needed to detonate within 10 feet, 3 meters, to guarantee a kill. Beyond 20 feet, the pressure wave dissipated harmlessly through water's incompressibility. The mathematics were brutal. A destroyer moving at 15 knots over a suspected U-boat position could drop a pattern of 10 charges. Each sank at roughly 8 feet per second. The submarine, meanwhile, executed evasive maneuvers at 7.6 knots submerged, changing depth and heading while sonar contact broke directly overhead. Hit probability? Less than 3%. In the first year of unrestricted warfare, U-boats sank 2,314 Allied ships.
British shipyards couldn't replace vessels fast enough. American Liberty ships took 42 days to build. U-boats took 60 seconds to sink them. The Atlantic was becoming a German lake. Something had to change. Not tactics, not strategy. Chemistry.
Royal Gunpowder Factory, Waltham Abbey, winter 1942. Dr. William Penny stared at test results that should have been impossible. The explosive compound designated Torpex, 42% RDX, 40% TNT, 18% aluminum powder, had just demonstrated energy release 50% greater than pure TNT. More critically, underwater detonation extended the shockwave duration by 35%. The aluminum made the difference. Superheated particles continued burning after initial detonation, extending the explosive pulse. In air, this meant marginally better performance. Underwater, where shockwaves don't dissipate but reflect, it meant catastrophic amplification. But creating Torpex at scale required manufacturing RDX, which before 1942 cost more than silver. Germany had 8 production facilities, Britain had 2. The stuff was reserved for torpedo warheads exclusively. How much to fill depth charges? Penny asked the ordnance liaison. 600 pounds per Mark 7, call it 270 kilograms. The officer checked production estimates. We're making 400,000 pounds of RDX monthly. Not enough. Penny ran calculations. A standard convoy escort carried 30 depth charges. Atlantic Command fielded 142 destroyers and corvettes. Call it 4,260 charges needing replacement monthly. That's over 1 million pounds. We'd need to triple production. The liaison officer lit a cigarette, watching chemical formulas multiply across the blackboard. Can it be done? If we convert munitions factories from TNT, Penny circled a figure, 6 months minimum. We don't have 6 months. Wolf packs are savaging convoys now. So they compromised. Priority allocation to aerial depth charges, smaller 250-pound versions for RAF Coastal Command. Shore-based bombers didn't need 30 charges, they needed precision. The first Torpex-filled air-dropped charge detonated April 12, 1943, above U-191. The submarine's pressure hull cracked like an eggshell. 15 seconds, surface to crush depth. 90 seconds, total crew mortality. 0 survivors. The weapon worked. Now they needed 10,000 more. North Atlantic, May 1943. The turning point nobody photographed. Oberlieutenant Klaus Bargston commanded U-521, conducting his 3rd war patrol. 12 successful attacks, 8 confirmed kills. He'd survived 47 depth charge runs using textbook evasion, hard rudder, silent running, drop beneath the thermocline layer where sonar signals scattered. Then, everything changed. May 2nd, 0340 hours. HMS Vedette detected submerged contact. Standard procedure, establish firing solution, pass overhead at 15 knots, roll charges off the stern. Pattern of 10. Expected detonations at 150 feet. U-521 heard them coming. Bargston ordered emergency dive to 180 meters, beyond the depth charge's typical fusing. The first explosion felt different, louder. The shock wave didn't fade, it built. The secondary bubble pulse arrived with twice the force anyone had experienced. Overhead lights shattered, depth gauge needles bent against their stops. A weld line along frame 32 cracked with the sound like a gunshot. Hull breach, forward compartment. They surfaced, no choice. The crack was spreading. At 180 meters, the North Atlantic would pour through that failure point with enough pressure to cut a man in half. HMS Vedette was waiting. 4-inch guns opened fire before the conning tower cleared spray. 47 men went into the water.
11 survived to become prisoners. Bargston wasn't among them. The after-action report noted, new Torpex charges demonstrated significantly improved lethality, recommend immediate expansion of production. What they didn't report, the psychological impact on surviving U-boat crews. Word spread through Lorient, Saint-Nazaire, Bergen. The old depth charges, you could survive those at depth. The new ones, they found you deeper, hit harder. The steel itself became the weapon, vibrating at resonant frequencies that cracked welds from inside. U-boat commanders started refusing patrol orders, not from cowardice, from mathematics. The odds had fundamentally shifted. By June, 16 U-boats were sunk by air-dropped Torpex charges alone. The Atlantic wasn't German anymore.
Admiralty Intelligence Assessment, July 1943. Classified. Captain Roger Wynne studied loss curves with grim satisfaction. March through May, Allied shipping losses dropped from 627,000 tons to 264,000. Simultaneously, U-boat kills increased from 64 to 96. The weapon hadn't changed the game, it had ended it. But Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz wasn't blind. German Naval Intelligence Section B Dienst had already recovered unexploded Torpex charges from Norwegian waters. Their analysis was terrifying. Allied depth charges now operating at energy levels requiring revised evasion protocols. Operational depth minimums must increase from 100 to 150 meters. The problem? Type 7C pressure hulls weren't rated for sustained operations at 150 meters. Crush depth calculations, assuming a 2.5 safety factor, meant gambling with 280-meter tolerances. Exceed that, and the 18.5-millimeter steel hull would implode in approximately 0.3 seconds, faster than human perception. Dönitz ordered emergency modifications. The Type 7C/41 featured hull plating increased to 21 millimeters, pushing crush depth to 325 meters. Operational maximum, 120 meters. But retooling submarine production at Blohm & Voss, Krupp Germania, and Deschemag AG required 6 months. 6 months the Kriegsmarine didn't have. Meanwhile, Allied production accelerated insanely. American factories at Holston Ordnance Works were producing 50 million pounds of RDX monthly by August. British manufacturers added another 12 million. Every destroyer, corvette, and frigate, 347 vessels by October, carried Torpex exclusively. The arithmetic became genocidal. Average depth charge attacks per U-boat contact increased from 14 to 64. With Torpex's expanded lethal radius from 10 feet to nearly 26 feet, hit probability jumped from 3% to 11% per pattern. U-boat life expectancy dropped to 2.7 patrols, total. Of 1,162 U-boats commissioned during the war, 785 were destroyed. Approximately 28,000 submariners served. 28,000. 5,000 returned. The depth charge didn't just sink submarines, it erased an entire generation of German naval personnel. And the Allies kept dropping them.
Inside U-303, September 1943, Bay of Biscay. The sonar ping is a nail through your skull, high-frequency chirp bouncing off the pressure hull, painting your exact position on British ASTIC screens. Kapitänleutnant Heinz Ehlert Clausen orders silent running, but it's meaningless. They've been pinged, marked, tagged for death. Aircraft overhead, Sunderland, bearing 320. Through the periscope, Clausen sees it. 4 engines, RAF Coastal Command, already banking into attack position.
Emergency dive, all ahead full. The hydroplanes bite water. The submarine's bow drops 45 degrees. Men grab stanchions, feet sliding on grease-slicked deck plates. The diesel engines choke off. Electric motors whine at maximum amperage, pulling 750 horsepower from batteries that'll give them maybe 90 minutes submerged. Not enough. The depth gauge reads 40 meters when the first charge hits water. Through the hull, through the water itself, they hear it plunging, a metallic shriek descending. The hydrostatic pistol will fire at 75 feet, 23 meters. They're at 40 now, diving at 12 meters per minute. Math says they won't make it. Wham! The world inverts. Up becomes down. Forward becomes nowhere. The pressure wave compresses the entire submarine by 6 centimeters, insignificant in principle, catastrophic in practice. Every seal, every gasket, every pressure-bearing surface distorts simultaneously. The control room lighting dies. Emergency lamps cast red shadows. The chief engineer is screaming numbers. Leak in compartment 4, battery compartment flooding, rudder controls unresponsive. But his voice sounds underwater, filtered through burst eardrums. Another impact, the secondary shock wave, the gas bubble. This is what breaks submarines, not the initial blast, the cyclical expansion-contraction of explosive gases, like bending a steel ruler back and forth. 3 cycles, 5, 8. Frame 67 fails. The weld line running along the port side splits. High-pressure Atlantic seawater jets through the gap with enough force to cut through flesh. The dive angle steepens. 100 meters, 120, 150. Still falling.
Let's talk physics. Cold, merciless, mathematical physics. When 270 kilograms of Torpex detonates underwater at 75 feet depth, it doesn't explode outward uniformly. It creates a gas bubble approximately 12 feet in diameter, expanding at supersonic velocities. Peak pressure at the detonation point, 75,000 pounds per square inch. For context, that's equivalent to 5,000 atmospheres. The primary shock wave travels through water at 1,500 meters per second, 5 times faster than sound in air. Water's incompressibility is the weapon. In air, explosive gases expand into empty space, dissipating energy spherically. In water, they encounter massive resistance. The shock wave doesn't fade, it reflects, amplifies, concentrates. A Type 7C pressure hull comprises 18.5 millimeter steel with tensile strength of approximately 52,000 psi. At 100 meters operational depth, the hull experiences ambient pressure of 147 psi, well within tolerances. But when a Torpex charge detonates 20 feet away, localized overpressure spikes to 15,000 psi. The math is simple. Steel can't flex that much without permanent deformation. But the killer isn't the primary wave, it's the secondary pulse. The explosive gas bubble expands past equilibrium, then collapses under surrounding water pressure. This collapse generates a second shock wave, sometimes stronger than the first. The bubble rebounds, creating a third pulse, a fourth, up to 16 documented cycles. Each cycle bends the submarine's hull. Compress, expand, compress, expand. British engineers called it the whipsaw effect, like bending a paperclip repeatedly until metal fatigue causes fracture. Laboratory testing on captured U-boat hull sections showed critical failure at the 5th oscillation cycle. Welds cracked first, particularly at frame intersections, then rivet lines, finally the continuous shell plating itself. Distance calculations were precise. Complete hull breach at 3 to 6 meters. Severe structural damage at 8 to 10 meters. Disabling damage, flooding, equipment failure, loss of control at 20 meters. Beyond 30 meters, minimal damage. The submarine might survive. Below 30 meters, the crew heard God's hammer. Above 10 meters, they met him personally.
The terror has a sound, not the explosion,
Everyone expects explosions. It's the creaking afterward, the pressure hulls settling back into shape, or trying to. Steel groaning like a living thing, bulkheads flexing, rivets popping with sounds like rifle shots. Matrosen Obergefreiter Werner Hartenstein, U-156, wrote in his diary before his final patrol, "You can train men to accept death. You cannot train them to accept listening to their coffin crack open around them." The medical reports are clinical. Acute anxiety response characterized by tachycardia, hyperventilation, involuntary urination, and psychogenic paralysis. Translation: grown men, battle-hardened submariners reduced to catatonic shock. U-boat psychiatrists in Lorient documented depth-charge psychosis in 67% of crew members after 5 patrols. Symptoms: insomnia, auditory hallucinations, violent tremors when submerged. Some men heard depth charges that weren't there. Others stopped hearing real ones. Psychological deafness, the mind's circuit breaker against unbearable stress. Kapitänleutnant Eric Tope, U-552, described it. "You're sitting in absolute darkness. We cut all power to minimize detection, and you hear the splash, the depth charge hitting water. Then silence. You count. Every second is a lifetime. You know it's set for 150 feet. You're at 180, but mathematics means nothing when you're waiting for God to decide if you die." The waiting destroyed men faster than explosions. British submariners experienced similar trauma. HMS Trident survived 63 depth charge attacks. Post-war interviews revealed that crew members couldn't ride London subway trains. The tunnel acoustics triggered flashbacks. One officer committed suicide in 1947, leaving a note, "I can still hear them falling." The civilian mind can't process it. Imagine sitting in a sealed metal tube 150 meters underwater while someone systematically drops explosives nearby. You can't run, can't hide, can't fight back. You can only endure and count the seconds between splashes. Some men counted to 600 before surfacing. Some stopped counting altogether.
The Germans weren't passive victims. They adapted. BDU, Befehlshaber der U-Boote, issued Directive 447, August 1943. All boats to employ maximum depth operations. Survival probability increases 340% below 150 meters. But operational reality complicated theory. Diving to 150 meters in a Type 7C, rated for 100 meters operationally, required gambling with structural tolerances. Commanders reported hearing hull plates groan at 130 meters. At 150, rivets wept. Small leaks appeared. Nothing catastrophic, yet. Some boats survived. U-427 would eventually endure 678 depth charge attacks across 11 months. Her secret? Kapitänleutnant Wilhelm Bogar pioneered the deep bounce technique. Dive to 200 meters immediately on contact, regardless of rated depth. The gamble being that most British depth charges were fused for 150 feet. Going deeper meant entering a lethal zone if charges were set correctly, but escaping entirely if they weren't. U-boats also employed bold decoys, chemical canisters that generated false sonar contacts. Calcium hydride reacting with seawater produced massive hydrogen bubble clouds mimicking submarine signatures. Destroyers wasted depth charges on phantom targets. Sometimes. But the Allies adapted faster. The Hedgehog forward-throwing system entered service in 1942, spigot mortars firing 24 contact-fused projectiles ahead of the attacking vessel. Unlike depth charges, Hedgehogs only exploded on direct hull impact. No explosion meant no hit, preserving sonar contact. Any explosion meant confirmed kill.
Statistics were damning. Conventional depth charge attacks achieved 6% kill rate. Hedgehog attacks, 22%. By 1944, Type 21 electroboat submarines featured strengthened pressure hulls, 28mm plating, and crush depths approaching 400 meters. Too late. Only 4 became operational before war's end. Meanwhile, captured U-boat documents revealed something British intelligence hadn't anticipated: extensive notes on torpex composition, detonation characteristics, optimal evasion depths. The Germans knew exactly what was killing them. They'd studied it, tested it, calculated countermeasures, and died anyway. Knowledge without capability is just paperwork.
April 1945, Norwegian waters. U-427 on her final patrol. 678 depth charges. The number seems impossible, fictional, but Canadian records from HMCS Haida and HMCS Iroquois confirmed it. Multiple attack runs spanning 11 hours, exhausting both destroyers' complete ordnance loads. U-427 survived. How? The boat's Type 7C/41 hull, upgraded to 21mm plating, provided marginally better crush depth tolerance. Bogar's crew executed textbook evasion, extreme depth variations, silent running, exploiting thermal layers, and, crucially, luck. Pure statistical chance that 678 charges detonated outside lethal range. The submarine never sank a single Allied vessel. 5 patrols, 0 kills. Her legacy isn't offensive success, it's defensive impossibility. Proof that even optimized weapons face statistical limitations. May 8, 1945, U-427 surrendered at Narvik, Norway. Her pressure hull showed 127 documented crack repairs. Frame welds had been re-welded 17 times. She was sailing wreckage, held together by German engineering and desperate improvisation. Post-war analysis revealed depth charges sank 264 U-boats directly. Another 241 were damaged sufficiently to force scuttling or surface combat. Combined with other ASW weapons, Hedgehog, acoustic torpedoes, air attacks, Allied anti-submarine warfare achieved a 90% U-boat attrition rate by 1944. The modern legacy persists. Contemporary anti-submarine weapons, Mark 54 torpedoes, RUM-139 VL-ASROC systems, still employ shaped charge warheads optimized for underwater pressure pulse generation. The physics haven't changed, only the delivery mechanisms. Museums now display U-995, the only surviving Type 7C/41 at Labeau Naval Memorial. Visitors can walk through pressure compartments, touch welded hull repairs, imagine what 678 depth charges sounded like from inside. But reality fails. Reality was louder, more terrifying, more mathematically precise. The depth charge won through physics, relentless, calculable, unavoidable physics. Hull integrity versus hydrostatic pressure. Mathematics versus steel, and mathematics always wins. Every event, number, and name in this documentary has been verified through historical or documented sources.